Do you hate the thought of working past 55 or 60? Do you hate not being able to live the life you deserve today? Do you hate not knowing what your financial future looks like? It's time to stop doing what you hate. Here's your host, Mr. Harold Green.
Hello, everybody. This is Harold Green of Brightree Wealth Management, and it is time to stop doing what you hate. Hopefully, you're having a fantastic day today. Have a surprise guest on our show, Mr. Adam Koos. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you, and well done on the last name.
Oh, thank you very much, man. It's been a long time since we talked, but we do stay in touch periodically. And so, I broached this subject with Adam like some time ago, and we've been talking about it, and it's something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. And you folks all know my goal is to get you from the 97% to the 3%, basically meaning only 3% of people in America can retire with enough to live on that will last them their entire lives, while the other 97% are going to have to rely heavily on Social Security, public assistance, different things like that. So, we want to bring this to you to really help make an impact in your life. So again, Adam, welcome to the show. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where you're at again, so that once we're done with the show, if you guys want to look Adam up and if you're in his area, that would be fantastic for you. So just let everybody know where you're at, dude.
Sure. Yeah. Adam Koos, President, Senior Financial Advisor, Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group in Columbus, Ohio. And we are a financial planning and investment management firm helping people make work optional someday. So that's kind of the gist of it. If it's possible to put it in a nutshell, which it's impossible, as you well know, I'll just leave it there for today.
Yeah, awesome. So the title of today's show is going to be Marriage and Money. And I've been wanting to wade into this, but I've been very nervous to do so by myself. So I felt like I needed to bring in a big gun, if I can use that word, big gun.
I appreciate that. I'm honored you would even consider me a big gun. So yeah.
Yeah. If you're in this line of business, you're a gun. You're always shooting at a target. That's what we do. And, we have to try to kill it for our clients every single day. And if we're not, we're just part of the problem and not the solution. So, with this marriage and money thing, if I can use the word one accord, I like to say it like that. If we can all be on one accord so that we can effectively or efficiently and effectively grow our wealth, that's going to be very important. So one of the questions that I'm going to start off with asking Adam, you're married, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Married for, 21 years now.
21 years. Fantastic.
Thanks.
And you didn't know I was going to ask you this, and you can say, I don't want to answer this question, but why did you get married to the person that you are married to?
Ooh, that is a good question. That's a fun question. Of course I'm going to answer that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. There's not enough time to list, nor is there enough interest of your viewers and listeners. I would say, if I had to try and sum it up, I would say that I married my bride because she is cool, fun, funny, smart. She was I felt like my friend first, even though technically she wasn't. It wasn't like we were friends first, but I feel like she's a friend. I feel like I could spend endless time with her and never, ever even, I don't even like to use the phrase get sick of her. I would never, ever get sick of this woman. She's an amazing person. Didn't know she was going to become a great mom. I figured, but she's a wonderful mom, especially, coming from her upbringing, which was not easy. And I think that the other reason would be I'll give you two more. She's a guy's girl. And what I mean by that, she loves sports. We both probably use a little bit too much profanity, but she doesn't have a problem with that, and I don't have a problem with hers. And she can throw a football further than most guy friends I have. And I guess the last thing would be we're just I don't want to say we're opposites, but in a lot of ways we're very opposite. Like we like the same things, we share a lot of the same interests. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you want to be opposite when you marry somebody when it comes to your interests.
Right.
But I think in terms of personality, we're very different. Like I'm the extrovert in the family. She's more of the introvert.
Yep.
I'm a fast decision maker. Yep. She's very slow to make decisions. Yep. I'm only analytical on a situational basis, where I think she's analytical all the time.
Yep.
But anyway, I think that's probably too much already.
No, that's fantastic. I got married for probably some of the similar reasons, but I just didn't know who my wife was going to become, because I think it was 19 when I got married, 20 when I got married.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah,
I was 23. Wait, 24. I was 24. 24? She was 21. Yeah, we
Yeah,
dated 3 years,
I
but
was,
young.
she was like 3 years older than me when we got engaged. And so we had to get married if we wanted to be together because I was in Japan and I was going to change duty stations and come back to America. And they said, well, we can't have a long distance relationship like this because if I get stationed somewhere else, you'd either have to come with me or I can't see you anymore because it's just too hard, Japan and America. So
That's
we
rough.
started the process like a year and a half before I was supposed to rotate out. And thankfully at the last minute, they approved our marriage because in the military, you have to be approved to get married,
Wow.
especially to a foreign national. And there's, you talk about vetting. Back then, Adam, they vetted the hell out of you. My wife didn't even have a driver's license yet, but she had to go pull her driver's report to make sure she had no accidents. Like, do not get me started about what's happening right now at our
A
border,
little
okay? 'Cause
unnecessary.
I will turn as red as your Ohio State University T-shirt.
I kind
That's
of want
how
to see that
mad I would
actually, but
get.
yeah, I kind of want to see that.
But yeah. So she's our accountant. She manages all of our finances and things like that. She does it for our company. So
Is she still 3 years older than you?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, because if you figured out how to slow down age, I wanted to make sure we talked about that today.
I know. I
No,
know.
okay. Oh, well,
She's three
another
years older
episode
than me,
maybe.
but I think what it is I try not to age her out as much as I'm aging out. With all the stress. So I'm a very fast decision maker. She's very analytical, and so sometimes we have to make trades right away. So we can't languish forever on a trade.
I
We
got to
gotta do
follow
it
the
right
rules,
away.
right? Can't
Yeah.
think about it for
So
a night.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't do that. So thanks for sharing that with me. And I think that
Oh, my pleasure.
having similar interest and being different, I think that's what really keeps it fresh and exciting. Not getting bored of your spouse, like having somebody you can talk to and spend time with. I moved out here to Las Vegas now, and we actually take road trips. So imagine being in the car with your wife for like 7 or 8 hours.
Oh yeah, gas tank
You
trips,
gotta
right?
have something good to talk about.
That's more than one gas tank though. 7 hours,
Uh,
maybe.
I can
I don't know,
stretch it a little bit, but yeah, it's got to stop twice. One for gas, and then the other to use the bathroom. So
There we go.
yeah. So I want to get into the show, and you and I, we manage millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars for people. And one of the questions I have for you is do you find that when couples become financially successful, the cracks begin to show in their foundation, or what have you seen with this?
Wow, that's a good question too. I've never really thought about it honestly in terms of when they become successful. I tend to notice more cracks when people have kids than when they become successful. I feel like when people become successful and the more successful they become, I think the less you see budgeting and, they might track what they spent, but they're not going to track what they're going to spend. You know what I mean? In fact, that's more of an issue when it comes close to retirement, when it's like, wait a minute, depending on how much they saved, if they
Right.
saved enough,
Right.
and if they were excessive savers, which is always a great thing
Yep.
for us, obviously. But if they're excessive savers, then usually they still don't have to budget all that much. But
Right.
there are plenty of people out there that, they work their butts off. They're successful people. They help put their kids through school. They live great lifestyles. They go on vacations. They drive nice cars, have a nice house, and then they downsize, they dismount, and the next thing you know, it's like, man, I didn't really want to have to budget, in retirement, but I think most people have to do that. So I think that those would probably be the two biggest times I see cracks is when we get close to retirement, if you haven't saved a ton of money. And then when people have kids, I think that you start to, all the problems that you had in your marriage that you didn't figure out before kids,
Right.
those come to the surface fast when you
Wow.
have kids.
Yeah. Give me an example of something you can kind of think about.
Oh, wow. Everything.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of this list. I'm sure I'm not going to do it any justice. I mean, I'm thinking of people right now where, if you wanted to spend, I don't know, you got married and you said at the onset of your relationship, hey, just so you know, I'm going to spend time with my guy friends, and this is something we do. Every week we do this, and every Sunday we play poker, and then we go on a guy's vacation every year for a week. And then you get married and everything's fine, like no big deal. When you're gone, I'll do my thing. When you're doing this poker night, like I'll watch TV, like whatever. Then you have kids, and it's like, well, I want help, and
Right.
and I mean, I hate to say it, but you got to make some concessions, I think. And on one, it's tough because on one hand, it's like, well, look, I told you, we agreed to this, right? But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but I mean, the kids change everything, and not for the bad. I mean, I think most people start talking about all the things they lose when they have kids and not enough about the things they gain. But yeah, I would say that that's just things that you wanted before, the freedoms that you had before kids, that changes things and it causes stress. And then when it comes to money, kids are not cheap. I'm not sure what the new stat is, but I know that the old stat 10 years ago was that from the second your kid is born until they turn 18, having nothing to do with college, that kid's going to cost you $100,000.
Right.
And almost surely bigger now, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be
380 to 500.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, and if you do it in Hawaii,
that's okay. Is that the Hawaiian statistic though?
Add another zero.
Oh, geez. Anyway, yeah. I think that those when you start to see the cracks though, when they become more successful. I don't know. I don't know that I think you actually get less stress when you become more successful as far as finances are concerned, because you don't have to worry as much about money like maybe a lot of people do. You aren't stressed about how you're going to pay that mortgage next month,
Right. And so the whole thing with the kids, and one of the things I think about for a lot of families, when a couple gets married, they never sit down and put together an upfront contract. They never go through any of that. They're just so in love that love just smothers all reality.
Yep. I completely agree with you.
Yep. And then, like I said, you mentioned something funny. I don't know if you know anything about Asians when they get married, Asian moms when they get married. Like
no.
your wife literally turns into like your mom and your children's mom. She's not your wife anymore. So you have to make a very conscientious effort to say, hey, I get it. I understand how you want to raise the kids, but like raise your hand like, hello, I'm still here too. So that, if you're in a interracial, international marriage, it can be even more complicated because the way Asians manage money and the way Americans manage money, it's different. Especially if you were raised in an Asian household and you do things by the Asian book. Whereas for me, I grew up poor. I didn't have anything to manage. So there's a lot of times we had to sit down and say, hey, these are our goals and these are our plans. And so the next question I wanted to ask you was, when you have a couple that they're reluctant to put together a financial plan, what are some of the top reasons in the relationship why you think they won't put together a plan?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I think probably the biggest reason is because they haven't communicated enough about it themselves.
Okay.
I think they're probably intimidated. They're like, well, what are we going to talk about? I think many people, especially younger people, feel like we don't really have that much money yet. So why do we need a plan? I think that some people don't want to share the mistakes they're making or have made.
I see.
I think that maybe they'll be embarrassed. They're going into some office. I mean, we do a fair amount of pro bono work here, where we help people for free, just to help them out. And we've just recently we've had two situations where we've been helping somebody, not charging them a dime, spending lots of time with them, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure, or at least I'll use that as some examples. But I think the embarrassment's a big part of it. I think money's a very private thing, but it's also very emotional. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're making mistakes from a financial standpoint, which I think a lot of people, well, you know what? I'm going to go on the limb here. Yeah. I'm going to say that everyone has made plenty of financial mistakes, more than they'd like to admit. I'm going to raise my hand here and say I have. I couldn't remember all the financial mistakes I've made, and I do this for a living. So I think those are the big things, though.
Right. Now, I'm going to segue into a couple of different things. I want to talk about the two-pocket system. And I told clients before that I don't work well with couples that have a two-pocket system. And the reason why I share that with them is because I state that if you're going to retire together and not just like get divorced at the end, wouldn't it just kind of make sense to put your chips in one bag and multiply those chips and share them at the end of the day? And some are just reluctant to do that. Like, what is your rule for working with clients when they come on board and they say, hey, it's his and hers? And I'll be honest with you, some guys, they're great about this. Some guys are not. They're like, I make all the money. I'm the breadwinner. Like, she doesn't make anything. She stays home with the kids. So like, I'm macho man. Like, I rule the world kind of thing. Like, how do you deal with that? Because I'm sure you see it.
I mean, I think I'm thinking of two different scenarios. The single breadwinner situation. Fortunately, I haven't seen a lot of that
Okay.
in my 23-year career, but the times when I have seen it, we've taken them through the same process that we take all of our clients through, an intro call, a discovery meeting, an education meeting, financial plan.
Yep.
And at the end, we always tell people that when they ask anyway, that roughly 85% of the people who come in the door end up hiring us at the end of the day. But I bet now that you're asking, and I'm really kind of thinking about it, I bet that a lot of those 15%, or at least a fraction, a percentage of those 15% are those people that maybe aren't a good fit from a personality standpoint. In fact, whenever a client asks us, or a new prospective client says, well, for the 15% that don't hire, why don't they hire you? Or another great question is, have you ever been fired by, a client before? Have you ever lost clients? And anybody who says no is lying, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But they'll say why, and that's a great question. And I think that sometimes it's stuff like this. We've had clients who, the guy is super arrogant, like kind of like you're alluding to here. And not only is he not respectful to his wife, but he wasn't respectful to my staff.
Yes.
And he had to go. We literally had to fire this person.
Yeah.
And this was years ago. This was probably 2012 or 13. This person I'm thinking of. I mean, I think we fired under 20 clients in 23 years, but it's been something like that, 18, 19 clients, and he was one of them. And then, but I guess to what I was saying before, I think a lot of the 15% of the people who don't hire us, or at least some of them, are people like that, who they come in and you just get a really bad taste. It's almost awkward. Yeah. You feel bad for the other party, the other spouse. Right. You're like, why in the world? Why are you treating them this way? It's terrible. So I think that's part of it. And then the other, even more, I don't want to say more complicated, because, it is more complicated.
Yeah, go ahead.
That situation's simple. It's not fun. It's awkward. You feel terrible for the other spouse, but it's not complicated at all. It's just you've got, essentially you've got an asshole on your hands, and you probably don't want to work with them, and you go through your process because you don't want to be rude, but you kind of hope they don't hire you.
Right.
Or you hope that, this sounds terrible, but you hope that one day if they get divorced that the spouse will come back, because you want to help that person. You know what I mean? So, but the more complicated situations is what you're talking about, the two-pocket system. I mean, that is complicated. In fact, the person I was thinking of just a second ago when you asked me the question about more successful you get, things coming to the surface, cracks forming. And I mentioned that, I think it's when you have kids. The couple that came to mind right off the top of my head, I mean, they actually use a two-pocket system. Mm-hmm. I can think of another couple that we work with that they don't have any kids, which makes things a little simpler, but they also do the same thing. And it does create some complexities. I guess for us, we focus less on the cash flow and more on the goal at the end of the day. So I know your audience probably doesn't know this, but you do.
Right.
So, we use, between you and we use goals-based financial planning software because we've learned the hard way that when you use cash flow-based software, and you say, okay, we're spending this, we're making this, we're saving that, and whatever's left at the end of the day, it's saved. You and I both know that they're not going to save it, No. So it's the numbers, they never end up right. The income never ends up perfect, especially the expenses are definitely never end up perfect. So I think that by saying, if he makes this and she makes that, or if it's a same-sex couple, if they make separately this much money, and they're using a two-pocket system, they have separate bank accounts, they have separate spending, as long as they're saving X, whatever X happens to be. So like my last name's Koos, we always talk about like the Koos index, the family index.
Right.
It's not about beating the S&P 500. It's about meeting or beating the Koos index.
Yes.
And as long as we're saving enough to where both of our expenses can be covered conservatively at the end of the day, when we want to cut bait and make work optional, then I think we're going to be okay.
Right.
But, there's a lot of other things that come into play, and I don't know if we're going to get into that today, but, again, going back to the whole, when we have kids, marriage, it's complicated.
No, the goal of today was just to rip the Band-Aid off and go right at it, because I think that 50% of all marriages end up in divorce. We have a critical issue with young people not even getting married. We have like a shortage of workers in our country because people aren't having kids. Shortage of labor. We have some. You're talking about some systemic issues that if we don't get this thing fixed, and I think it all starts at the home first with the marriage situation
Totally.
and people raising families and creating productive humans, we're going to have some problems.
Yeah.
And, going back into the two pocket, I hear what you're saying. We also use cash flow end goals, but for me, I use cash flow as more of a way to CYA, and when clients retire and how much do you need and so on and so forth. And whereas you're tackling it from size of a pot kind of situation, like we want X in a pot, and then you guys can do whatever you want with that pot.
Well, we did our job. To clarify, we're all about cash flow once we retire.
Got it.
If that makes sense. Yeah. So from retirement on, cash flow is crucial, but pre-retirement, it's all about the bucket because people spend what they spend.
Right.
We could have. I don't want to call it famous, but because it's not obviously famous, I'm just a figure of speech. But we have somebody who's no longer a client anymore, who came in here years ago. We're talking 15 years ago, and he said, very, very egregious person, very, very type A, and very confident. Let's just say, and he says, with his wife sitting right next to him, which was shocking to watch him say these things. Mm-hmm. But he said to me, "Hey, I got this new job, and basically I'm helping to build this company up. And so right now, I said, well, how much are we going to save? Well, right now I'm going to save, like $1,000 a month, but that's going to double every year from now until retirement." And I'm listening to this statement. I'm like, wait a minute. It's kind of like the old saying when you're a kid or young in finance, and they say, would you rather have $1 million or a penny doubled every day for a month? Right. And it was like that. I immediately started thinking of the math in my head, and I'm like, oh boy, how's this going to look? This is going to look ridiculous, right? Totally unrealistic. So I was like, so next year you're going to save $2,000 a month. He goes, yeah, for sure. And I said, okay. And then the next year, 3,000, like 4,000 a month then? He goes, yep. And I'm like, okay, listen. I was like, that means the next year you're saving $8,000 a month. Are we sure we want to use these numbers? He said, oh yeah. And he's looking at his wife for approval, and his wife's just all on board, almost like, and they had a great, and still do, by the way, still have a great marriage. I don't talk to him much anymore, but like I said, they're not clients anymore, right. But you could see that she just has this glowing admiration for him. And that, she was, she's a stay-at-home mom, and, he was always the breadwinner, and he changed careers but I just kept thinking there's no freaking way that this guy at year 10, is going to be putting away $40,000 a month. You know what I mean? I mean, if he owned the company, he wouldn't be doing that. Right, so anyway, it's like, I already forgot the question. I got all fired up about this situation, but
no, we're talking about the two-pocket system, and
two-pocket system. So I mean, this is one of the, I guess, option A of the two, where he's making all the money, and he's, like I said, very egregious and very, very confident, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's like I couldn't even be of any help, because eventually, when the money didn't get put away like he said it would,
right,
then he stopped responding to emails. Then they stopped coming in for meetings, because going back to that embarrassment, except this embarrassment was created out of thin air, right? It didn't exist to begin with, but he created the embarrassment by setting expectations and promises to himself, his wife, and me that were way, 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 way too high. So, and inevitably, he ended up just leaving. And, blame the market, blame portfolio management, whatever. It didn't matter at the end of the day, but it was like he wasn't. We always talk about financial planning, whether you're a couple using joint finances or a two-pocket system. And we always talk about how it's like the life of retirement planning is like a marathon, and the wind and the elevation is the market. And if you've ever run any kind of race, whether it be a 5K, 10K, whatever, marathon, half marathon, how awesome it is when you're running downhill, even just a slight downhill grade, or the wind's at your back. It feels awesome.
Right.
And you also know how terrible it feels when you're at a slight incline or even a big incline, right? That's a market crash, and the wind's blowing at your face, or it's raining, right? You want to quit. Right. You want to quit halfway through the marathon or less. You get that cramp, that hump. The cramp might be, when you're finishing up having kids and you're paying for college, maybe that's the cramp, metaphorically speaking.
Right.
But I think that anybody who sits at the starting line and waits for the market to blow them to the finish line is never going to make it. You got to put one foot in front of the other, which is saving and making progress. And this individual didn't put one foot in front of the other and sat around waiting for the wind to blow him there. And it wasn't going to happen. You know what I mean? So,
right. The other question I had for you is, how do you deal with this issue of one person makes a lot of money, and therefore they feel they have autonomy to spend the money that they make, whereas the other spouse may not make as much. And yet, how do you circle that square? Like, how do you, because I'm sure it probably comes up. And like I said, I know you don't get into cash flow, but we're talking about the things that can hinder the end goal, things that could sabotage you. Like if we're building a plane, we want to make sure that, the plane is sound, right? So how do you deal with that?
Well, like I was mentioning earlier, it hasn't happened a lot, thankfully.
Okay.
But when it's happened, I guess I would say we've done two things. We continue maybe more strongly than in any other meeting, using words like you two, or phrases like you two and we. We might even bring ourselves into it, like we live in the house or something, and say, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to save. Now, I'm not saving for them, right? That's what they're doing. But by making it more of a joint discussion at the conference table, as opposed to I make this and I'm spending that, or like one of the ones that I can remember off the top of my head is she really wanted this really expensive car, and she wants this, and well, he wants this to his car, and he wants, it's like you get into these arguments,
right?
And I guess we could talk a lot about just communication alone, which I thought for sure that was going to be your first question.
No,
and my
but
first answer was going to be communication, by the way.
Yeah.
And it was going to be very boring. Like, I thought I was going to start by saying, well, I hate to say it, but communication. So important. I think that first is just trying to be polite, and from the standpoint of a consultant, we're the planner in the what do you want to call it? I don't want to say facilitator, but yeah, I guess facilitator. We are facilitating this plan, playing quarterback, or we always like to say they own the football team. We're the head coach.
Yep,
we're picking who sits, who starts, who's drafted, whether we're on offense, defense, what plays get called. But there's only been a couple times where I've said things like, I guess step two is if things get too bad, I love using humor. And so another thing I've done several times, I guess, now that I think about it, is I'll say, hey, do you guys need us to leave the room for a minute? And I'll laugh.
I've done that.
And it kind of makes the point that, look, the two of you need to calm down, communicate better, because this is getting a little awkward for us. You know what I mean? The advisors in the room.
Yeah.
And then the last thing,
to the bathroom and let them calm down, because I've seen some things where, I didn't want to call security, but it was just kind of like, let me leave, you guys calm down, and then you kind of get this squared away, because it was more about, it's more about like spending for the kids. And, you're up there in Ohio, and over here in the United States, you got like travel soccer, travel basketball, travel baseball, travel volleyball. Like people are spending $1 gazillion on travel sports. Like,
yep. Let me just say this.
Yeah.
It just hit me as you were talking. Nobody ever wins an argument. That's it. And that's the first big thing. So if as soon as you start arguing, and somebody is seeking out to win so that the other person loses, you both lost at the end of the day. I mean, you both lost. So I think that one of the other pieces of advice I heard, my dad actually put this in our wedding card. And I put it in everybody else's wedding card when I get invited to weddings, but it says, listen twice as much as you talk, and always be the first to admit you're wrong. Be self-reflective. And I think that's crucial, but that's not financial advice, right? And we have to be careful that we're not. I always joke, I have a double major in finance and psychology, and I always joke that I use the psychology degree more than I do the finance degree sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think that people get fired up, and it's all there's so much history there, right? And when you have that history, it's really, really tough to fix those problems.
Yeah.
That you've had that discussion before, you've argued about it before, So, I mean, it's tough. So I think that step one is, for me anyway, it's listen, be patient, try to maybe start invoking more we. Instead of you or you. When I say you or you, if this was a YouTube video, I'm pointing at one person versus the other, making eye contact. I'm saying more things like we, the two of you, they, whatever. And then I think step three is use some humor. Try to get people to relax a little bit. I think that if you say, hey, you guys need us to leave the room for a second, it's like all of a sudden it can kind of shake the room up and shake some of that negativity, and maybe we all get to laugh just for a quick second, and we can calm down.
Right.
And then I think the last one, and I'm trying to think, has this ever happened? Aside from that one situation where we had to fire that person back in 2012, 2013, who was being disrespectful not only to the spouse, but to our staff, Thankfully, I've never had to just step up and say, "Look, that's it, we're done." I mean, we've had to do that with a couple people, but not for negative reasons. It's like we've had somebody just this past year come in the office and say, you know, hey, we want to talk to you about hiring you, and here's our $1.5 million, and it's all invested in Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, and Netflix. And by the way, when we're done, I don't want you to sell any of them. I just want you to manage those 4 stocks. It's like, wait a minute. Like, this isn't going to work. So it was what was supposed to be a 2.5-hour discovery meeting turned into a 15-minute. Hey, great to know you, appreciate you being interested, but this isn't a good fit. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that step 4 is literally having, I'm sure I can't even imagine, but having the guts to as the advisor in the room to say, look, I don't appreciate how, and maybe the way I would say it is how you two are talking to each other. That way I'm not placing blame on one person,
right?
But to say, look, if the two of you can't communicate well and can't talk to each other respectfully here in this office, then I can only imagine that when you leave and you're supposed to take this home with, call it homework, if you will, and you're supposed to implement this stuff on the other 364 days and 23 hours that you're not with me, I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah, it's crazy because, like I said, 50% of marriages end in divorce. And so it's just like trying to help people stay married, trying to help people get their kids through college, trying to help people get to retirement, and just like trying to help people live healthy, decent lives. I mean, it's it almost makes you want to sell your company. I mean, sometimes it's just so hard because you have to wear so many different hats.
It's tough,
But yeah,
it's funny. I hope my kids don't listen to this until they're out of college. But it's one of the reasons my wife and I always talk about how we don't want our kids to get in this business. It's a tough business. I don't think people have any clue how difficult it is to deal with so many different personalities and families. And next to your health, what's more important? You might argue religion, but other than that, I mean, next to your health, this is the most important thing in your life. I always say money is I got this from a friend and long time ago, and it was just an awesome quote that money is a unit of choice. The more units you have, the more choices you have.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's what it's all about, and then as far as couples are concerned, trying to work together as a team, embracing each other's differences and strengths and weaknesses, it's crucial to success at the end of the day.
And I think I want to kind of end on this kind of note where, and I've seen this a lot where I have one couple or one person in the family, the husband and wife, one's really conservative and one's super aggressive. And I had a client that was super conservative, and they ended up leaving because they were too conservative. Whereas the spouse was ultra aggressive, and the conservative spouse, I've made them 58% year to date.
Jeez.
Yes. And they left because the volatility that took us there, they couldn't handle the volatility.
I always joke that a portfolio like that would be like having to wear a flame retardant suit in a car that goes, a quarter mile in less than 10 seconds, because the engine might explode frequently. But
top fuel. The top fuel drag racer is what that is.
Right.
Yeah. And so, we use a lot of high octane, and some days it's great. And, we'll be cruising along at 300 miles an hour. And next thing you know, something happens with, Israel, geopolitical, something that's totally out of control, tire blows up, boom. And it's just kind of going down the track. And it was to them, they couldn't handle that. And because they would look at it every day. And if it's up, they're on cloud 9. If it's down, they're, having to seek professional help kind of thing. And what the client told me, they said, you've made me so much money that my spouse looks at that and says, Harold's making him all this money. Why do I need to take this risk? Why don't I just put the money in the bank or do something conservative like that? And he said, for my own mental sanity, I just let my spouse do whatever. I just have to kind of let that go.
Yeah.
So how do you handle situations like that when you see one spouse is like, rah, 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 let's go, take on the world. And the other spouse is like, oh my God, like I want to go hide in a cave. They're still married. They got to get to the finish line together. So how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah. So it's, thankfully that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. It happens way more than the other stuff we've been talking about so far. But I would say the the first thing we do, and we try to keep things joint still. Like you can do risk assessments and, you can do 2 risk assessments for everybody, and you can do 2 financial plans for everybody because it's based on complete risk. But it's not going to work at the end of the day. You're literally going to have 2 different outcomes, right? So I think the first thing we try to do is we try to get them to agree to something in the middle. So compromise, so just to use a simple, we're not going to go through a 14 question assessment on this podcast, but if the question was as simple as, and there isn't a question like this, but let's just say there was a question that said, from 1 to 10, with 10 being top field dragster and 1 being, I'm afraid to leave the house in the morning because I don't want to get hit by a car. Where would you put yourself from a risk standpoint? And one spouse says 8 and the other spouse says 4. Then we're going to meet in the middle right around a 5, and see and make sure they're okay with that.
Okay.
Rarely they will say they're not okay with that. And situations like that, lots of education. And I think that usually we can get the 8 down to a 7, and we can get the 4 up to a 7 usually. And that's just lots of education about market history, expectation setting, looking at drawdowns of the past, just doing, I don't want to say doing math, but like getting a whiteboard out if necessary, and just, writing down, here's what you can expect, and I think lots of expectation setting is crucial. But I think that, when we look at portfolio models, like we run 18 different portfolio models here, and all of our clients own, 2, 3 of those models. So one of the things we might do is while every client's going to own at least 2 models, for the couple that has 2 different risk profiles, even after they've seen the financial plan, here's a good example. One of the spouses is a 9 out of 10 risk wide, the other one's a 3. Mm-hmm. And when you do the financial plan, which is all that matters, you and I both know that. Yep. When you do the financial plan at the end of the day, you go, you know what? Guess what? Good news. Because you 2 have been so responsible, because you save so well, because your expenses aren't ridiculous when you retire, you've got, realistic expectations for yourselves. You actually don't have to take much more risk than to get a 4.5% net rate of return for the rest of your life. And you will more than likely, with a 90% probability or higher, never ever run out of money in retirement.
But Adam, I want the excitement. I'm like an excitement junkie here.
Sure. And when that's action. That's good. So we still need to start with, this is all you need, which is going to make the more conservative spouse happy. Yeah. But what you want is something that's more exciting than that. You're going to be bored. Then I think we carve out a portion of money. And I always stop to check base. Like, what do you think if we would carve out a portion of that money and put it into an aggressive portfolio, but maybe in order to make, the more conservative spouse happy, what if we used, instead of just an aggressive strategic buy and hold portfolio, which I'm not a huge fan of, what if we used a tactical model, like a trend following model that is really aggressive when the market's kicking on all cylinders, but it could sit in the tornado bunker, when things are not looking so good. Right. How would you 2 feel about a situation like that? Something more dynamic, and usually we can get them on board together. And then from there, that we've only gotten halfway there then. And now from there, we have to touch base, right? Yep. Every meeting, here's where we started, here's where we are, here's what happened in the market. And if it's one of those situations where nothing crazy's happened in the market, that's good, but not good, right? It's good because obviously they made money. Right. It's not good because we didn't test our emotions yet. Right. Because anybody who fills out one of these risk assessments, you and I both know the way they fill it out. I'll say the way they would fill it out in July 1st is going to be completely different to the questions they answer, or the answers they give us on August 1st, given what the market did, going down 10% on the S&P 500 in 3 weeks, 16% on the NASDAQ. The answers are going to be different because people's risk tolerance changes depending what the market's doing. The way they answer those questions in the middle of 2022 or in 2008 or in 2002 is going to be completely different than how they'd answered at the peak of a bull market. Right. So I think
it's like, are you buying season tickets to the Ohio State University football team? Well, it depends on how they, play last year, right? Like,
right.
That kind of thing. And I have a couple of more, or just like one more major question. This is very important because, again, if 50% of all marriages end in divorce, imagine what happens to 50% of all financial planning relationships. So
decimated.
I see this as we get married. I marry a couple. Like, they are married to me. I'm married to them. We're now family. That's how I literally see this. Like, I am part of the family.
Totally agree. That's why I think that's one of the reasons we get along.
Exactly. So when one person says, oh, you know what, this Adam guy or this Harold guy, I'm starting to lose hope. I'm starting to lose faith. Like, how do you talk to them about stuff like that? Because I'm sure they all have their separate friends, they all have their things, and they come home and they talk to each other and they try to go along to get along. But sometimes, how do you deal with like losing faith in of one spouse losing faith in you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's happened before. We just lost a client, what was it, or a couple of weeks ago, that was a huge advocate for us. Referred friends, family, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, she asked us this laundry list of questions, which we answered. Like what are your fees? What are the expense ratios on the ETFs you use? Things like that, and we answered all the questions. And she said she was talking to the bank, which shocked me. I'm thinking, whoa, the bank? You got to be serious. So it's, immediately we feel like we're on edge because wait a minute, we've done so much for this person. They've been so reliant on us. They've been huge advocates. And all it took was one meeting with somebody at the bank, and I can only speculate on what happened. I have no idea because they wouldn't even respond to an exit interview. But it could have been that this person just enamored them with, hey, you're big enough now to where you could be a part of our private client group.
Oh, wow. They got,
and they could have lied about fees. I mean, that happens. You and I both know as fiduciaries, that happens all the time in our industry. And by the way, omitting to me is the same as lying. By saying, well, what are their fees? And part of being a fiduciary, as you and I both are, we are transparent about our fees. That's how it is. So all these other, I shouldn't say all these other firms, I got to be careful. Many other firms just don't share what all their fees are. They focus so much on selling, for lack of a better word, that's just kind of how it goes. So I'm just sharing one example, but I think that when people start to lose faith, all you can do is re-educate, go back to the beginning. I don't want to say start from scratch, but say, hey, one of the things I like to say is just, I like to tell people, we do this every day, all day long.
Right.
Every day. I mean, every week we are having the same conversations with people, probably 15 to 25 times a week, just depending on the season, right? If we're in the middle of, what we call surge meeting season, which is we're having a lot of meetings going on, client review meetings. You hear it once or twice a year. And then by the time, the statistic I've heard, there's no science to prove this, but what I've heard time and time again is by the time a client leaves our office and gets to their car in the parking lot, they have forgotten at least 85% of everything that we talked about. So absolutely. I think that coming back to first base, re-education, expectation setting again, I think I think that's the first best thing you can do. I also think that there's a lot of value in providing people an out. And what I mean by that is if you've tried that and it worked okay, like we've had situations where we tried it, it worked really well. At the first beginning of the appointment, there was huge concerns. And at the end of the appointment, it's like, man, I'm really glad we had this conversation. Thanks so much. And then they leave. 3 months later, we're having the same conversation again. And then the same thing happens again. We had the discussion at the end. They said, I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I feel so much better.
Groundhog Day.
Well, seriously, fast forward. I'm not joking. This is a real story. Fast forward 3 or 4 more of those appointments. And the conversation is going, I'm so glad I came in here because every time I come in, I always feel so much better.
Right.
But we're sitting there going, oh my God, like this has got to stick at some point,
Point. Right.
So that's where we have to give them an out. And I start doing that not at the end of the meeting, but at the beginning of the meeting, or say, look, this isn't clearly, this keeps coming up, and I do think that we need to re-educate and we need to communicate, and there's no such thing as over communication.
Right.
However, if you're going to be upset, I'd rather you be upset at somebody else.
Right.
And if we're not the right fit for you, then I think maybe it might make sense for you to start maybe interview a couple of other advisory firms to see if there's another better fit, because I'm doing my best here. And true story, I'm losing sleep over it. I think about you, like at home. and when I'm saying this, because this has happened many, many times in my career where I will lose sleep and I think about these people like in my free time where I can't listen to what my wife's saying to me in the passenger seat of a car, or my kids are talking to me and they want to, and I can't focus because I'm concerned about this client who, and the irony is they're not listening to us. They're not, it's not sinking in, and maybe it's something I'm doing wrong. Or it's just a personality misfit. Like it just doesn't work. So I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but
no, I call that feelings over facts. And when people come in and sit down and say, I feel so much better, and I put out a market minute at least 2 or 3 times a month, and especially when the stock market goes crazy, I get on the mic and I just go through an analysis and explain to clients what happened today and what's going to happen next week. And here's what we're going to do. I call that flying the plane. You know, when the passenger's in the back, there's a lot of turbulence and the pilot comes on, he says, you know, what he says, you know, and they're going to be trying to find clear and blah, 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 buckle up, we'll get you on the ground soon, you know, and you got to talk to your clients, like talk them down out of the air like that. But sometimes, you know, it's more of an emotional thing, and we can't fix that.
Yeah.
You know, and I hate
that's where you pull out the Ron White joke, right? Like if the other engine goes out, then how long will the plane take us? And he says, all the way to the scene of the crash.
Oh
It's one of my favorite Ron White jokes.
I guess
sorry, go ahead.
No, I guess we can sum it up like this. The first thing, you know, I like to use, like, I would say the 3 C's. So if I had a 3 C's in a conversation with clients like this, I'd say, first of all, you got to care. Number 2, you got to communicate. And number 3, you have to compromise.
Yep.
You know,
that's perfect. I love that.
Care.
I'm going to steal that.
Yep. Care, communicate, compromise. And I'll give you an example. I told my wife when my company was struggling, she's in control of the finances. And she said, after my Audi had, you know, the lease was up on the Audi, the company wasn't doing well. She said, you can't have another one. I said, what do you mean you can't have another one? She said, no, you can't have another one. The company's not doing well. So go get something cheap. And so I said, okay. So with my tail between my legs, and again, we have to save money. We have to pay, you know, we have to take care of our clients. We got to take care of our expenses. And so for me, it was like, okay, let me take this medicine because maybe I haven't done everything I can to generate the revenue in the firm that I should be generating. Maybe I'm not clicking on all cylinders. So I went from an Audi down to a Jeep. I had to lease a little Jeep, you know, for 3 years. And every day I drove this Jeep, I drove it like with a big chip on my shoulder that, hey, I know my wife is right. I don't like this situation. I got to work harder. And I said, but I promised myself when I'm done with the situation, I'm going to go get whatever I want. So I fixed it. I work weekends. I work nights. I killed it. I worked very hard to take care of my clients.
Grind.
And so when lease was about to expire, she's like, what are you going to get now? And I was like, well, I got to think about this. Maybe I'll get another Audi. Maybe, just maybe, I'll get a Porsche.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
You're talking to a car guy, by the way, so you're not going to get any arguments here.
No, and that's exactly
I give bad advice with cars.
No, and it was that's exactly what I did. I cared enough to communicate with my wife, and then I compromised when I had to. And I didn't say, well, I own this company. I have to keep up all these appearances. What are my clients going to think about me? Blah, 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 blah. You know, first thing they said, what happened to the Audi? Well, I got rid of it. The lease was expired and I wanted an SUV. So I did that. Like, you know, not like I sucked and now, you know, I can't get what I want.
Right.
And so, you know, I just wanted to bring you on and just kind of give people ideas as to what they need to do to make sure that their not only their relationship is clicking on all cylinders, but, you know, their financial plan is clicking on all cylinders. And so if you had any parting words to people, like, what would you say?
I would say that you just touched on it. It's just communication. It's so huge. I think it's communication. Leave your ego at the door. I would even schedule communications. Like if you're struggling, have at least a monthly financial meeting after the kids are in bed. Yeah. Sit down, go over your finances. Here's what we spent last month. You know, here's what we planned on spending. Did we go over? Were we under? If we were under, awesome. Celebrate. Get a bottle of wine out. You know, whatever you like to drink. Celebrate. Yep. If it's really bad, weekly. You know, weekly isn't bad. I don't think it's terrible to kind of, here's what we did last week. You know, here's what we spent. Okay, we screwed up. Let's do better next week. And here's how we're going to do it. In fact, let's make up for that overspending this week by cutting. So I think that's another piece of it. And then I think the other part is look yourself in the mirror when you're by yourself and, you know, think about why you married this person. You know, you asked me, that was the first question you asked me today. Why'd you marry, you know, Donna is my wife. Yeah. And ask yourself why you married him. Don't think about the bad things. Think about all the good reasons and all the positive reasons you married them. And then when I said check your ego at the door, think about what you can fix. And then realize only you can fix you. You can't fix them.
Right.
And then just ask them to do the same. Right. Say, look, I'm not going to try and fix you, Harold, because I can't. I'm not you. But I married you for a reason. Here's my list of reasons. Mm-hmm. And here's all the reasons, you know, I love you. And what I'd like for you to do at some point this week is to look at yourself in the mirror like I have and just think about all the reasons you married me. And then try to check your ego at the door and say, look, we need to do this, and we're either going to do it together or we're going to do it apart. And I don't want to do it apart.
Right.
So that'd be my first piece of advice. But we're out of time.
No, that's good, guys. Oh my God, it's time to stop doing what you hate. And if you hate arguing with your wife or your spouse, your partner,
who does, right?
Start to put this stuff into action. And if you're in the Columbus, Ohio area, look up Adam Koos and his company, because I believe they're doing some great work up there. And so not only can he help you with the finances, he has that degree in psychology. Not saying that he wants to be talking about you and your personal problems all day, but I'm sure some of that might happen. And so thank you all for tuning in to today's show. And until next time, everybody, 1, 2, 3, let's get it.
This is the podcastfactory.com.